Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. This is a devotional word for August 23rd, 2024 out of the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. The Corinthians had a lot of skewed ideas about what it meant to serve the Lord. In the first half of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, they had a lot of questions about marriage. It seems that based upon what the Apostle Paul wrote to them, that they had asked the following questions. And we remember that 1 Corinthians is actually a response to a letter that they wrote to Paul. They were asking, is it better to divorce? If you're married, if two Christians are married, is it better to divorce so that your time can be fully devoted to the Lord? And the Apostle Paul says, absolutely not. They went on to ask the question, if a Christian is married to an unbeliever, would it be better to divorce because you could once again have more time to serve the Lord? And the Apostle Paul would say no. They were even asking questions like this: is it better to abstain from sex in marriage so that we can be more pure? And the Apostle Paul said, no, God has given you sex as a blessing, and let each one render due affection to their spouse. And so they had a lot of questions. Along that line of thinking, they were asking some other questions, and it seems to be along this theme. When we became a Christian, or when a person becomes a Christian, should we recalibrate everything? If I'm a slave, should I try to be free? If I'm working as a tradesman, would it be better for me to work in the government to affect more people? If I'm a merchant, should I change jobs and become a preacher? In other words, should I totally reboot my life when I become a Christian? Is it better? Do I have to change everything? Should I change everything? The Apostle Paul gives a very reasonable answer to that. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, let me find it. He says this: but as God has distributed to each one, he's going to say here, God has called you in the place that you are to serve him. As God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. If you're a slave, he's going to say, if you can gain your freedom, great, but don't think you can't serve God as a slave. Are you a merchant? Don't think that you need to become a big business owner in order to serve God. Just stay who you are, be who you are. As God has distributed to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk, and so I ordain in all the churches. So this was the common calling and direction for all the churches. Was anyone called while circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not become circumcised. Circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping the commandments of God is what matters. So for the Jews, circumcision was a huge thing. It was part of the covenant agreement between Jehovah and the nation of Israel. And circumcision in the male body declared to the world that a man was set apart for God. Paul would go on to teach that circumcision, though it sets the body apart, it doesn't set the soul apart. And so for those Jewish people that were trying to compel Gentiles to become circumcised, Paul argued against it. And so that line of thinking, I started out as a Jew, but now I realize that circumcision doesn't save me. Should I get it reversed? Or I started out as a Gentile, but these Jews seem to be so zealous for God. Should I become circumcised? Paul just simply says, listen, be the man, be the woman that you are when God called you. Now, he's not affirming and permitting illegal activity. One should not say, well, I was a drug dealer when God called me, therefore I'm going to maintain the drug selling trade. No, he's not saying that. I was in the mafia when I got saved. Get out of the mafia. He's not saying to continue on in illegal activities. But he's also saying this: don't think you have to upend everything in order to serve God. Are you married? Stay married. Are you single? Be single. Let God change the situation. God's not calling you to upend everything except where your allegiance lies. And sometimes people with misplaced zeal will upend everything when really God hasn't called them to. Paul goes on to say, let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Don't concern yourself about it. But if you can be made free, rather use it. Freedom would be great, but you can serve God as a slave. There are masters who need Christian slaves to witness to them. For he who is called in the Lord, while a slave is the Lord's freedman. So the slave, though indebted or under the control of a master, is still free in the Lord. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. The free man, when called to Christ, becomes a slave to Jesus. So it's all about that perspective. Here's a summary statement. You were bought at a price. Do not become the slaves of men. Back in chapter 1, they were saying, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas. I'm even of Jesus. We're better than you. I follow Jesus and you guys follow men. Paul's saying, don't become a slave to anybody. Don't become a slave to your denomination or your celebrity pastors or your celebrity worship leaders or people in your family or anything. Be who you are. Be the person that God called. When he called you, be that person and let God make the improvements. Let God make the changes. Let Jesus redirect you. You don't have to upend your life. Just hold a steady course and take your hand off the rudder and let God redirect as he will. You were bought at a price. Do not become the slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. So if you're a new Christian, just get close to Jesus. That's the most important thing. If you're an older Christian and you're feeling like, my life is, I'm stunted in my growth, I'm stalling out, I don't know what to do, maybe I should just change everything. Well, maybe you should, but don't do it unless you're convinced that the Lord is directing you to do it. Whatever state you're in, whatever level of the societal ladder you're at, whatever rung on the ladder you're at, be fully sold out to Jesus in that place. That's the important thing. If God wants to change your station in life, let him do that. But we don't have to rush off to change everything thinking that's going to improve things. Oftentimes we create more problems for ourselves. If you're married, stay married. If you're single, stay single. Until God changes it, maybe God will bring you into marriage. But don't think that you have to change everything so you can better serve Jesus. Let your heart be changed and everything else will work out from there. So some things to think about. Thanks for watching.